Welcome to Art 101. In today's class, we'll be looking at the structures of the parathyroid and thyroid glands, as well as the pancreas. If we have time, we will also be looking at the adrenal gland. So, when we look at the slide for the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland is often attached. So here, that's the parathyroid gland right there. And it's basically a P-shaped gland that's hiding out on the back of the thyroid gland. The thyroid's a larger gland, and its histology is made up of these follicles. Since the two glands generally are seen together, I'm going to draw both of them together, but you could have histology slides that are thyroid gland only and parathyroid gland only. So the thyroid gland consists of these thyroid follicles that have a colloid in the middle that contains iodine and the precursors to make thyroid hormone. So these follicular cells are cells that surround the follicle, and their job is to make thyroid hormone. Now in here, we have parafollicular cells. The parafollicular cells get their name because they're between the follicles, and their job is to make something called calcitonin. So let's start by drawing some follicles. So here are 3 follicles, and to draw them, I'm just basically drawing a circle, drawing a second circle, and then the lines in between. And since these are nucleated cells, I'm going to give them all nucleuses. Now, the follicular cells surround the follicle, and then inside the follicle, they have something called the colloid, which is precursors for thyroid hormone, mostly iodine. So let's fill in the colloid. So the parafollicular cells are these cells in here and in here that are between the follicles, and they're going to make calcitonin. So let's draw some parafollicular cells. So these would be the parafollicular cells. Now I'm going to draw a magical band of connective tissue. And in reality, it's not rainbow color. And we're now going to work on the parathyroid gland. So all this would be thyroid, this would be the parathyroid. Now the parathyroid is mostly these small cells called chief cells, and they're really fun to draw. You will get probably repetitive motion syndrome in your wrist though, but basically make just lots of these little black dots. So these are chief cells. Their job is to make parathyroid hormone, which is a very important hormone that raises blood calcium levels. Now, every once in a while, I'll get this oxyphil. The oxyphil is this larger cell, and they have no idea what it's doing. It could be a resting cell, it could be a burnt out cell. So it's sort of like the chromophobes. They're not sure, but it's always very visible. So let's put a couple oxyphils in there. Like that. So now let's label. So this structure right here is the parathyroid gland, and it has 2 kinds of cells. It has these chief cells, which make parathyroid hormone, PTH, and parathyroid hormone increases osteoclast activity, it increases calcium reabsorption in the kidneys, it increases reabsorption of calcium, or absorption of calcium in the intestines, so PTH increases blood calcium levels. Then we have our chief cell. And those are the bigger cells that they don't know what they do. So that means the rest of this picture is all the thyroid gland. And it's made up of thyroid follicles. So this whole thing would be a thyroid follicle. Now, what's in the middle is something called colloid. And we're not going to worry about labeling the colloid, because I want you to focus on this as a big thyroid follicle. Now, these cells that are surrounding the outside are called follicular, and they make a hormone called thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is a metabolic hormone. It increases energy expenditure. It increases cell metabolic rate. It basically speeds up your metabolism. Now, these cells in between the follicles are called parafollicular cells. and they make a hormone called calcitonin. Calcitonin lowers blood calcium levels, so they increase osteoblast activity and they inhibit osteoclast activity. So parathyroid hormone is going to raise calcium. Calcitonin lowers blood calcium. So this is what the thyroid and the parathyroid histology looks like. Again, you may have the glands separate or you may have it together. Our next gland is the pancreas. Now the pancreas is frustrating for histology because we're looking for these little islands called islet cells, and they're in the sea of these pancreatic acini. Acini actually means berry. So when you actually look at the histology slide, you'll be looking and looking and looking. And a lot of times, people mistake this, which is actually a duct with connective tissue around it, for one of the islets. So I'm going to draw two islets here, pancreatic islets, or islets of Langerhans. Oh my goodness, that's a big islet. And we'll label them islets. Now the rest are these pancreatic acini. They get their names because they look like berries. So I'm going to try to draw a berry here. They tend to be darker on the outside than the inside. Oops. And there we go. So that's the pancreatic islet. So we need to label the islets and the acini. Now the islets, so this is the islet, are going to make two hormones that are opposing each other. One is insulin and the other is glucagon. Insulin lowers blood sugar after a meal. Glucagon raises blood sugar if you are fasting or have not eaten for a while. So they're opposites. And these are made by alpha and beta cells. Alpha cells make glucagon, beta cells make insulin, but you can't tell an alpha versus a beta cell in there. So this is what your picture should look like. Maybe add some nucleuses there. So let's go on to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is actually two glands that's divided into an outer cortex and an inner medulla. Now the cortex, I always think, looks like Neapolitan ice cream. We have a strawberry, a chocolate, and a vanilla layer to it, and the layers make different hormones. The medulla is actually going to resemble more nervous tissue. It's basically a gigantic sympathetic ganglia, and it's going to release epinephrine. The cortex, remember our vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, that is going to make steroid hormones. So most of these other hormones we've talked about, in fact, all of them are peptide hormones. These make steroid hormones, testosterone, estrogen, in this zona reticularis right here. The zona fasciculata makes cortisol, and then aldosterone is made in the zona glomerulosa. Now this picture is not a great picture. It's actually taken from a document camera to see the different areas of it. So let's look at a zoomed in picture. This is an enlarged picture of the adrenal gland, and it has been photoshopped to Hades. So we can clearly see a distinct adrenal medulla and an adrenal cortex. So everything below here is the medulla. We could see some of their colorful Crumpfin cells in there. And then we have our adrenal cortex. So all of this up here is the adrenal cortex. Remember, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, Neapolitan ice cream. Then there's an outer capsule. Sometimes you'll see some adipose in there. So let us begin and draw this. So first let's delineate the medulla and the cortex. So here, I'm going to do a line, and under here will be the medulla. And then I want a thin cortex, like so. And yes, I'm wasting all of this slight space out here. So the medulla has very colorful cells called chromaffin cells. And here are the chromaffin cells, and let's get them nuclei. And if you look under like 1200 times, you could see more of the neural tissue in here. But we're doing a magnification that shows both the cortex and the medulla. So this would be the medulla with the chromaffin cells. And sometimes you'll see a capillary going through as well. Now our cortex, which would be out here, is divided into 3 layers. Our first layer is the zona reticularis, and it makes testosterone and estrogen in both sexes. And in humans, it's not very thick, so we're just going to make it 2 cell layers thick. Now our outer layer up here is the zona glomerulosa, and it too has small cells. It's a little bit thicker usually than the zona reticularis. Again, I'll just draw it by making the cells. Okay, 20 minutes later, I have my zona glomerulosa. Now, I'm not going to draw in the cells of the zona reticularis. That is going to take an hour to draw them in. But basically, it's a white, the zone looks white, you'll just see thin outlines of cells. So this would be the zona reticularis. So, let us label. This outer part is called the adrenal cortex, and this inner part is called the adrenal medulla. The big colorful cells in here are called chromaffin cells, and they make the neurohormone epinephrine. The neurohormone epinephrine has basically the same effect as the neurotransmitter norepinephrine. It speeds heart rate, it's a bronchodilator, it will cause vasoconstriction in arteries in the digestive system. So it's basically the same as the neurotransmitter, but it floats through your blood. Now, we have 3 zones in our cortex: the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. The zona glomerulosa is this outer, usually a darker region, and it makes the hormone aldosterone, which affects water retention in the kidneys. The middle zone, right here, is the zona fasciculata, and it makes cortisol. This is the zone adrenal corticotropic hormone affects the most, and cortisol is a stress hormone. It releases fatty acids into the blood, it inhibits inflammation, it basically gets your body ready to expend energy and deal with stress. This last zone, it's usually the thinnest in the histology slides, is the zona reticularis, and it makes the sex hormones estrogen and testosterone in both sexes. Now, the gonads are going to make a lot more of these hormones. So women produce so much more estrogen from their ovaries, and men produce so much more testosterone from their testicles. And women will actually convert some of the estrogen made by their ovaries into testosterone at ovulation. So testosterone deals with sex drive in both sexes, and estrogen deals with HDL levels. It is converted into this hormone that might play a role in helping with memory, and it may actually help with sperm maturation. So again, the adrenal cortex has 3 zones: the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. The zona glomerulosa, the purple zone here, makes aldosterone, which causes you to retain water by retaining sodium in the kidneys. The zona fasciculata makes cortisol, which is a stress hormone. You deal with it when you release it when you need to deal with stress. It inhibits inflammation. It frees up fatty acids into your blood. It actually helps with gluconeogenesis. And then we have our zona reticularis, which is very thin, makes very small amounts of estrogen and testosterone. Now, the other name of estrogen is estradiol. I want you